And we're live. Good evening. Welcome. If you're here, it's Monday night. You have joined us for the CARES program. Every Monday night, we come and we gather together with expert speakers. And if it's their first time here for the CARES program, we'd like to let you know what we're about. CARES stands for Communities and Relatives Empowered for Support. And the support is for those who are supporting family members. Addiction, drugs, alcohol, anything in that space. If this is a space where you want to learn more about what this life is like and how do we support, how we provide resources, this is the community for you. And tonight, we have a very special speaker. This is Professor Mayan Herman. And Professor Herman, Mayan, has been with the School of Social Work for some time now, but she also has extensive experience working in recovery centers, residential treatment, as well as being a practitioner that works with families and supervises other clinicians as well. So this is an area of expertise and passion for her. And tonight, she'll be guiding us because, as we all know, we're heading into the holidays. Thanksgiving, Christmas, and our final two speakers are helping us be able to learn how do we navigate in these spaces where we might have challenges with family members or trying to just bridge the communication. So with that said, Mayan, thank you so much for being here with us tonight and sharing your experience and wisdom.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So Mayan, I'm going to start off by kicking off, but what would you say is one of the biggest challenges for family members in the space of recovery when you head into a holiday season like Thanksgiving?
Yeah, there's a couple challenges. I think communication, which I know we're talking about tonight, I think it's sometimes being an anniversary is a hard thing for some people. If like the holiday before was a rough time or there was any kind of relapse or use. So I think there's a lot of preparation that can go into like helping yourself before the holidays, but I think having conversations around boundaries, what the holidays are going to look like for family members. I know sometimes people can get avoidant during it, or some people don't want to talk about it. It really just depends on what's going on with the family, but I think it will help to talk about how to have those conversations with loved ones and what you want to do. And if something happened in previous holidays, like what can be done differently, what worked, what didn't work.
All right. So for those of you who are here live, those who are watching online, or may even be watching the video, this is a bit of a preview of what you're going to get over the next 30, 40 minutes in terms of talking here. So you actually brought in a presentation for us to kind of go through. So Mayan, if you want, we'll see if we can kick off the slides here and follow your lead through this communication.
Yeah, and also I love having dialogue around this. So I'm also open to people jumping in, questions. I like more of a discussion. Some of my slides are a little bit silly because I like to insert humor for difficult topics too. So excuse my humor. Yeah.
And we're going to see if we can filter it either on the monitor here or back there. So.
Awesome. Yeah, so for tonight, I know the topic is, I put 3 steps, but there's many steps we can cover tonight, but how to effectively talk with family members, with loved ones who are struggling with active addiction. So that will be our topic for tonight.
I love how you frame that as 3 steps too. Is oftentimes it's hard to keep track. You know, you get a lot of different advice from different people in terms of how to handle that, but for us to narrow it down to these 3 steps, with that first step being?
Yeah, so just things I'm going to cover tonight. The first thing is mistakes and learning from mistakes. I feel like sometimes it's trial and error with loved ones who are struggling with addiction, is not always knowing how to communicate effectively, when is the right time. So coming from a trauma-informed approach and also a neurobiological approach. So when I say that, meaning like using brain science, talking about how the brain functions and how addiction impacts the way we communicate. So that's one thing we'll talk about. And then the next thing, expectations. I feel like that is something really helpful to consider before going into these conversations and the holidays. Is like, what are you expecting of your family members, of yourself? What are you expecting that's going to happen, and checking them to make sure they're realistic? Because sometimes our expectations of ourselves and others can really stress us out and cause us a lot of anxiety, thought distortion. So We'll talk about that. And then the relationship between control, boundaries, and resentment, because resentment is a really common feeling that comes up, especially for family members, especially when I used to work with people who are in recovery. Resentment was always a big topic and the most really important emotion to work through because it can really feed addiction. So we'll talk about all those three, the correlation between all three. Oh yeah, so the first thing, has anyone heard about the stages of change? So that's a big thing when doing work in recovery is working with someone's stage of change. So the first stage is called pre-contemplative stage. You can't really see it well, but this guy's in therapy and he's like, how long have I had this problem? And he's like you can't see, he's ripping stuff out of the couch. But pre-contemplative stage of change is when you're not ready to change. Like your frontal cortex is shut off. So anything you say to that person, they're going to be defensive, they're going to be in denial. It's going to be really frustrating. And so the one thing I learned, even from my own mistakes, is that when you push someone in a pre-contemplative stage of change, you just push them away more. And then the more you push, the more they don't want to talk to you. And I made that mistake. Because I remember when I first entered recovery, like in the recovery field at rehab, I did that. And I got pushback. Or people tell you what you want to hear, right? So that's when I'm talking about the neurobiological approach is like working with the brain, not working against how brain science goes. So that's the first thing. Then the next slide is like what I was saying before is that when we all get there when we're in a pre-contemplative stage of change, we shut down the reasoning part of our brain. Like we can't access logic. We might be stuck in our emotion center. I don't know if that sounds familiar to anyone where someone comes at you and tries to talk to you and you're like, I'm not having it right now. That's when we're stuck in our amygdalas, or the little almond shape in our brain. And what I noticed a lot was when people would enter rehab for the first time, they were usually in a pre-contemplative stage because of the shock of being there and suddenly being sober and not having your safety net. So that's the first step, is trying to figure out what stage of change is your family member in. Are they still stuck in their emotion center? Are they contemplative, where they're like, all right, I got a problem, but I'm not going to do anything about it? Then there's a preparation stage where like, okay, I've got a problem, what can I do? And then there's the actively doing something about it and then maintaining it. And that's what I learned is you have to meet someone where they're at in that stage, or you're not going to build a relationship with them.
Mayan, if I can ask, sometimes, I hear families say, I don't know, how to have a conversation with them if they're in this pre-contemplative stage and there's still kind of, they haven't really accepted that there's issues happening and they may be going into that emotion phase of them. So how do you handle that when you're sitting around the table, turkey, people are having more to drink than they usually need to or should? How do people have that conversation in those moments, or do they?
Well, yeah, that's tough because in the moment, that's why I think it's good to have some preparation beforehand. But it also is if your family member wants to talk about it. It depends on the situation. But if you're at the dinner table and that's happening, I think that's harder to address, right? That is a tough thing. So I would recommend, if you are able to have a conversation beforehand, to see where your family member's at. Are you comfortable being here? Sometimes that annoys people though, right? Even if you check in with people, they can get annoyed and push you away. So I think it really just depends where they're at. Are they currently in treatment? Are they getting any services? If they are at a pre-contemplative stage, that conversation is going to be tough, and they're probably going to do whatever they want to do. So I think if there's any way to have a conversation before the holidays, and I know Thanksgiving's coming up next week, right? So is your family member willing to sit down and talk about it? Is there anything we can do as a family to be comforting or to be helpful? Or is there something we shouldn't be doing? Families are massive triggers, right? So if you have some kind of communication with your loved one, what triggers them during the holidays? I'm sure everything, right? Everyone gets triggered with their families. I don't know who doesn't. But I think finding out what are the triggers, and a lot of those triggers are going to occur before the Thanksgiving even hits the corner, right? Or Christmas comes around, or Hanukkah comes around. It's going to be It's going to be the anticipation. And sometimes people will prepare for that because of the anxiety and everything. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I think it's really trying to address that before Thanksgiving, before Christmas, holidays.
So I got to say, the part of me is like my brain is just moving in so many different directions, and it's thinking about how you're framing this. There was a time where it's like everyone would gather around in a circle around someone, and there was almost like this shame of like, you need to stop doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
And you're not saying that. You're saying, well, do they want to have that conversation? Are they going to be annoyed? Are they going to be triggered by it? Not having to be in that moment or wait to be around the dinner table to just throw all this out there. What you're describing is a very sensitive approach of just trying to understand what they're thinking or what they're feeling.
Yeah, definitely. Because just imagine you do it in the moment. First of all, it's awkward. You're putting a lot of the spotlight on that person. And how much change are you going to affect in front of everybody? Because it's like, I know it's your best intention is like, please be careful. Like, let's not with the drinking or whatever the drug of choice is. But in the moment, that would actually make us get into our amygdalas even more, our emotion center. Even family members who are prepared for the conversation in the moment would probably overreact, right? So yeah, you definitely don't want to address that. And then what change are you going to affect if you address it at the dinner table? Like how many people are going to take that well? Like, thank you so much for your Some people can, right? But if they are ready to drink and they're being told not to in the moment, I can't imagine that going very well. So it's like some kind of relationship building before you get to that point.
So that's a mistake sometimes that we make. We dive into it without recognizing the brain behind what's going on and why the reaction comes up.
Yeah.
What else in terms of like communication techniques or advice?
Oh yeah, if we go to another slide. As number 2, I can't even see that one, but it's distress tolerance. Which is something that always needs to be worked on. When I was in rehab centers, going from using to sudden sobriety, you have absolutely no tolerance to stress. Everything is overwhelming and triggering. Plus, if you're going through withdrawals, and then even when you are in active use, you don't have distress tolerance because you're always dealing with stress or anxiety by using. Right? So your body never actually gets a chance to sit with the difficult feelings, which are often shame, guilt, any kind of trauma from the family. So I have this one up here that's like, yeah, I'm just oh no, it disappeared. I'm just alone with my demons, but it turns out they're actually good company. It's because like the hardest part about being in recovery is sitting with your demons. And I think it's also the same thing for family members who aren't in recovery. Is they have to sit with some of the guilt and shame of what's going on with their loved ones. So before addressing that issue at the dinner table, it's like, what is going on with your loved one? Have they had a chance to work on any of this stuff, or are they still so active in their addiction? And that's why if you're at the dinner table and address it, it's going to have a bad reaction. Because people in addiction need that period of sobriety to be able to sit with those tough feelings. So that's the second thing I made a mistake with too, is not teaching people those skills of like, and also as family members, how do you sit with a loved one who's not going to change in that moment? Because we want to push and push, right? Or tell someone what they need to do. But if we don't know how to sit with the discomfort ourselves, we can really fixate on other people.
And pardon me if I'm jumping ahead, but how do people handle the distress that they're having? Is there something that they can specifically do when they feel like, oh, yep, temperature's starting to rise here, voices are starting to get louder, and people are starting to kind of like drift? Is there anything that helps either the family member to calm down in that moment when the brain is all activated?
Yeah, I think it would be helpful to have a plan. Like, I think even just those relapse prevention plans we used to do in treatment, you can do that for yourself, even if you're not in recovery, is like, what do I need to do for myself before the holidays come up so I don't explode or I don't get stuck in my emotions so much that it kind of blurs my judgment or I argue with somebody. So I would say get all your triggers out. Like, what are the triggers going to be? Do you know what your triggers are? Who are you going to talk to before the holidays? Do you have a therapist? Do you have a support group? Or do you have Al-Anon? Do you have people you can prepare with? Because I would really process that relapse plan. It's like, all right, what triggers me? This might happen. So it's a lot of hypotheticals. If this were to happen, what can I do for myself? If my family member is going to be drinking in front of me, like, what am I going to do in that moment? So you're like, I know it sounds like future tripping, but you're planning. Because I think what happens is sometimes we jump into action and then we don't know how to equip ourselves with the tools. So I say that planning is really helpful, and having a backup plan, right? Like, do you have any kind of coping skills in the moment? Is there someone you can go talk to in the family? Do you need to step outside? Do you need something with you at the table, literally, if you're going to get angry to squeeze, right? It just depends on what might come up for you in that moment. Yeah.
All right, so not working on distress tolerance is a mistake we often make. So have a plan ahead of time, who to talk to, things you can do in the moment, not wait for that moment to come up to then try to figure that out. So
Yeah.
plan ahead. All right.
Plan ahead. And learn how to sit with some of those feelings before you talk to your loved one who's addicted, because we can often take anything we're going through and bring it right into the conversation and be projecting without realizing. So it's like, have you been able to sit with your feelings? Which I know is like the roughest part of that. But like, have you gotten to sit with your sadness and your guilt or your shame, your resentment, your anger towards your loved one? Because if we don't get some time with that and like work through that, it definitely comes out in the communication and it creates a disconnect. The same for anything, right? If we don't actually work through our pain somehow, we will end up saying things that are blurred by our own experiences.
I heard someone say that there's a reason why I only see my family around the holidays.
Yeah.
So, you have people that may not see each other for months, and these emotions, they're built up or they're unaddressed, right? And then we fly in, we all hug each other, and then all of a sudden, within a couple of days, right, or just a short amount of time, the emotions come up. So you're suggesting that, 2 weeks now before Thanksgiving, we should start doing this work right now?
Yeah, and I would recommend having someone to talk to or having someone to fall back on so you don't do it all on your own. But like journaling, writing, what is going to come up for me when I'm with my family? I have to do it for myself, right? Like all our families trigger us. I have to like plan and say, if she does this, what are you going to do? Are you going to snap back like you did last time, which just caused more of a disconnect, right? So like I have to do it. So hypotheticals, all right, when anger comes up, what are you going to do with your anger? Just going to let it make the conversation awkward? Are you going to like leave and go on a walk? Are you going to journal about it? So, yeah.
Okay, game plan.
Families bring up a lot, right?
All right, perfect. Well, so we've got this as mistake number 2, not working on distress tolerance. And walk us through this here in terms of lack of distress tolerance equals deflection. What does that mean?
I don't know if anyone's watched Seinfeld, but Frank Costanza there's this episode where he's like, he's always screaming on the show, if anyone's watched it. And he does this thing called Serenity Now, which he thinks calms him, but he's always screaming Serenity Now. Like, I don't know if you've ever met people that are trying to work on their anger or impatience, but while they're doing it, they're still like very actively angry. So that just made me laugh, is that sometimes when we avoid distress tolerance, we're deflecting from our feelings. So what I mean by that is sometimes we can fixate on the person who has the problem, but we forget to look at our part. And so the more we focus on that loved one and what they're doing and how they're making us feel, but we're not also taking care of ourselves and focusing on what's going on with us, we can deflect from our own problems, which sometimes someone in active addiction can point out to us, right? They'll point out our issues, and it can get nasty sometimes. It can get really ugly, especially if you're saying really hurtful things. So that's one thing, is what maybe exploring, like, what is something that you can deflect from sometimes, right? So for example, with my family, if I'm getting angry at my mom or something, if I'm only fixating on everything she did to me, and I'm not really focusing in on what I can do, right? Oh, you did this to me, you did that to me, but wait, I also have control over the situation, which is really hard to do, right, when strong emotions come up. Anyways, I'm blabbing, but yeah.
No. This is great. I mean, when I think of deflection, you're talking about the person that will scream, but there are some people that don't scream.
Yeah.
Okay, so what does that look like on the opposite side for the person that just never speaks out when maybe they should be angry? But how do you handle that between those two sides? The ones that are much more open with their emotions, and then the others that I feel like it's not safe for me to say that.
Yeah, I think everyone at that point is working out of their defense mechanisms, right? For those who don't get angry and always like keep to themselves, it could sometimes be people pleasing, or you're used to being that person who doesn't rock the boat, or you're conflict avoidant, or you just don't want to cause conflict, or you're worried if you say something will make it worse. So that's always in the family system where you do have someone who stays really quiet and doesn't want to face the conflict, and then you have someone who's ready to escalate it. But for people that don't often address it, I would also encourage them to work through a plan themselves. Is if you stay numb too, I don't know how much you're connecting with what's going on with yourself. But at the same time, if everyone's addressing the issue at the dinner table, that gets messy too.
All right. So past this here, we've got mistake number 3, and walk us through this one.
Yeah, this one made me laugh just because she's surrounded by those live, laugh, love things, and it's making her crazy. But what I've learned also just working with people is sometimes tough love can be really helpful, and sometimes it's not helpful. I've seen like two ends of the spectrum. So when I mean tough love is like you're always being really tough. You have boundaries, but you might be so boundaried that there's like almost no room for a relationship. Like not even room to plant a seed. You know what I mean? Versus being totally having no boundaries and being extremely loving and compassionate, which can sometimes turn to enabling. So I've seen the tough love approach used at a rehab center where I didn't actually think it was that effective every single time, because I'm like, well, people are humans, right? We also need to like scale back and treat them with respect. So that's something I wanted to get into more, is like, how do you balance tough love and boundaries? And then how do you balance that like compassion, but also that part that can get enabling, where you don't set any boundaries?
Okay, that's an excellent question. I want to dive into that because I hear that a lot from families where it's like a parent might be like, well, no, we just need to be strict on this hard line. And you've got another parent that says, well, wait a minute, you got to be compassionate and understand. And they seem to be like almost opposing ways of handling the problem. In the middle, you have a child or a family member that just goes back and forth. So you're saying there needs to be a balance. And I don't know if the next slide addresses that, but I like how.
Yeah.
Okay, there it is.
Yeah, but it's hard to balance, right? Because if you're not checking in with yourself and how you're feeling before you communicate, it can come off differently. But what I've seen is that if you get too much tough love and you get into that authoritative kind of parenting or style, is that you're not connecting in any kind of way. You're almost just like you're being the parent. You could be a parent to your own brother, your sister, your own parent, right? So it can get to the point where you're heavily parenting when that's not what the person needs. Because the more you try to control the situation with your loved one who's addicted, the more they're going to push away and rebel against you. And that's also the root of the addiction, right? Is trying to feel some kind of escape from not feeling in control, or not feeling good enough. So the tough love can be super helpful, but when it's used 24/7, you kind of bring up those old childhood wounds where you, as a kid, like didn't feel good enough. Or you feel insufficient, or you feel like life doesn't have meaning. I've seen that. And I've made that mistake myself where I like used a lot of tough love and authoritative stuff, and it doesn't help me connect to people. Like, people need boundaries, but they also need you to be on their side.
So it sounds like the key concern here isn't so much that that you're using tough love, it's just when that's your only go-to.
Yeah,
and that's the hard line. Now, on the opposite side, someone that isn't taking the tough love approach, so what's the problem there? What could go wrong?
Yeah, I've seen the enabling side is like, we'll do anything for you. We're always here for you, which is good. You want to be there. We're always here for you, no matter how many times they use again. You always are giving money, or there might be certain things and I have some dialogue examples in a second, but you might still be financially providing or doing things that kind of feed the addiction. So that's when enabling becomes a problem, is they need your love and support, but they also need you to put your foot down. Like, I'm not giving you any more money, or no, you can't stay here. You've already stayed here before, and if you've destroyed anything or messed anything up, right? So there has to be some kind of boundary you're setting. But I've seen parents who have come in, and I'll do the example, or siblings, where it's so much tough love that I'm like, we're not going to be communicating today in this family session. Like, nothing's getting done. We're going to have to lower and I think sometimes the authoritative is putting your walls up because you don't want to get hurt again. You don't want to lose people. So I understand where it's coming from. Same with enabling. You don't want to lose people, so you want to keep them in your life. You want to keep paying for them. I see both sides,
Can a person balance that? And can they learn when to use tough love and when to be more supportive and find that balance? Is that possible?
It is. It's just hard. There's no easy solution. It is possible, but it's going to be a lot of taking care of yourself. Like, you have to put yourself first, which I know sounds way easier said than done, and it depends on the culture of your family. But it's going to be a lot of you checking in with yourself, and what are you expecting out of your loved one? And we'll talk about that in a second. What are you expecting from yourself as a parent, a sibling, a cousin? Are you expecting to fix this addiction? Are you expecting your loved one to fix their addiction? Are you expecting them to get clean in a certain amount of time? So I think we have to check in, like, what is our expectation of ourselves versus our loved one? I don't think we often think about that, because if we can check our expectations, we can see, like, is it realistic for me to really think my loved one is going to get sober in 2 weeks or 2 months, right? Is it realistic for me to constantly be paying for my loved one every time they're in trouble? What's that going to look like for me down the road financially? When is it going to end? What am I expecting from myself? Am I expecting to, like, have this all figured out and get them better? I think sometimes as a loved one, or as a caregiver, or the parent or the sibling, you might expect yourself to be getting your loved one sober. And that's a huge expectation to have on yourself too.
Mayan, something that really strikes me is that we started off talking about understanding the person that's in addiction and the brain and how they respond to us. And now you've gotten us to a point where now we're challenging ourselves to understand our own expectations. And so much of, I guess, conversations that happen around the dinner table, around holidays, or maybe even after the holidays, is about this person or this happened. But I don't often hear people share that. It's like, well, wait a minute, I could have done this differently. Or I could have changed some of my expectations on that.
Definitely. And I would ask yourself before the holidays, what are you expecting from the holidays? If your loved one is coming to the dinner table and you're worried about them, what are you expecting of them? What are you expecting of yourself? Write it down. I would literally write it out. Is it realistic? Are you expecting so much of yourself that it's stressing you out? Because I've definitely had expectations on myself that cause me horrible anxiety and guilt. Like, high expectations that are up here and you can't meet them, and you can make yourself feel so bad. And I noticed in rehab that a lot of times some people would have these expectations of themselves, like, I should have figured this out by now. I should have gotten sober 10 years ago. And I'm like, is that realistic though? Is that a realistic expectation? Is that helping you move forward, or is that keeping you in the past? And that's a huge root of the addiction, is being fixated on the past or fixating too much on the future, right? And not being able to sit with the present, the distress tolerance. So we'd have to constantly check expectations with people, and people being frustrated through step work. Why haven't I worked through it yet? Why don't I feel enlightenment, right? Why is that realistic to think you're going to hit some kind of point of enlightenment this soon into your recovery? So yeah, I can go on and on about that one.
Well, you have a couple slides here that says examples of expectations. So walk us through these slides, and what do you mean by these?
Yeah, and then I'd love to hear from people, because I want it to be discussion-based too. But things I noticed, just for example, when I worked with some parents, There was an 18-year-old I worked with, and this is an example of a tough love that was like really intense and authoritative to the point where we weren't able to have a productive family session, where he was so tired of paying for rehab and coming back, and he's like, my daughter is just saying just what you want to hear. She's tricking you. You think she's doing great and she's excelling at rehab, but she's going to go back and use again every single time like she's always done. And he was so set on it. And I was like, well, have you gotten yourself into Al-Anon? Have you given it a try? Have you talked to a therapist? Because it's not just about what your daughter's doing. What are you doing for yourself? And he's like, I don't need Al-Anon. I don't need that. I'm married to a therapist. I remember that. He's like, that's where I get all my advice. He was so closed off. He had his walls up. So that's when I say the authoritative kind of approach to your loved one is you might actually have more walls up than the person who's addicted. And so in this way, I talked to her about her expectations. Well, his expectations were like, he didn't want to get hurt. He was so tired of getting hurt. So he's like, I'm done learning. Like, I don't need to learn. So that's when you shut off your frontal cortex. You're like, no, thank you. No more of that. I'm going to do what I'm going to just set the expectation she's never getting better. Which I asked him, how is that helping you as a parent if that's your expectation of your daughter at 18, right? Like, so that's when there's no balance there. It's like, well, where's the compassion too? She just turned 18. She was just a child. So from his perspective, right, it was like she's never getting better. From her perspective, when I talked to her, she's like, I'm not good enough for him, right? And it was and that's where therapy, a lot of stuff came out. Like, he just given up on me. And then she was always seeking men's attention in negative ways because she was always trying to get her father's attention. So it leads to a lot of these externalizing behaviors too. So that's one example where it was no expectations and it was like full-on authoritative approach, which is not effective.
Well, and this is a perfect moment here, especially as we start diving deeper into examples. I know there's people in the audience and also people online, for sure, that have their own examples too, of expectations and questions too. And if it's an okay moment, I want to open up the space. If there are questions, please feel free. We won't have a microphone moving around, but if you say the question, we're going to go ahead and repeat it here so that it can go through online, and then Mayan, if you could answer for us. But yeah, feel free to raise your hand and share your question.
You mentioned the closing off of the prefrontal cortex.
Mm-hmm.
When you're closed-minded to options, how could you help yourself open up to ideas of that, or maybe help someone else who's closed off in their mindset?
That's a really good question. So the question is like, how do you work with someone who's closed off or their prefrontal cortex is like, see you later? When it's with yourself, you don't always notice it, right? Like if we're ever stuck in denial, we're not usually like, I'm in so much denial right now, but I'm cool with it. I mean, sometimes people are like that, but I don't often see that as the case. But how do you approach people who are in that pre-contemplative stage? Well, I would ask yourself, what are you expecting out of that person? Because if they're in denial and they're not accessing logic up here and they're in their feelings, what are you, hypothetically, how are they going to respond to you if you were to bring something up? But depending on what it is, are you wanting to bring up treatment? Are you wanting to have a conversation about their use? What is that going to look like if they're not ready? So that is a good question, that's when you have to meet someone where they're at. This is a part of distress tolerance that is so uncomfortable, is like, can you sit with the discomfort of knowing you're not going to change them in that moment, but they might change their mind at some point. So I used to do that when I'd have clients who were in denial, even in treatment. They'd be like, I don't have a problem. My wife made me come here, or there's an ultimatum. I pushed initially and was like, that doesn't work. And so I would really just be on their level and sometimes have to talk about stuff that was completely unrelated to the addiction. Well, what did you do for fun before or can't even get to that point, but what do you do for fun? When you have moments when you're sober, what do you look forward to? If we were to talk about you getting treatment, what would that look like? You could ask hypotheticals if they're willing. So it's kind of like motivational interviewing. Okay, you don't want to get treatment now, that's cool. What will things look like for you in 5 years from now? Or, so it's kind of, any kind of hypothetical is planting a seed if they're okay with it. So I would still do that with people. I would do motivational interviewing questions. All right, there's no issue right now. You've said that. That's cool. We're not going to push it. But what do you think the experience is like for other people hearing you say that? So it was a lot of reflection. And you get a group and someone's in denial, they get that challenge from the whole group, and that would happen sometimes, which would help someone open up. But I think you have to ask yourself, how much energy do I want to put into it? Because you want to preserve your own energy. And not to be mean, but it's like, if you spend a lot of energy with someone in a pre-contemplative stage of change, you'll get so frustrated, and you want to take care of yourself. So if it doesn't go the way I want it to, what am I expecting? And how can I take care of myself after? That's a tough one, though, right? There's not like a simple answer. But I say preserve yourself, like take care of yourself. And just know that you're going to be met with resistance, and that's normal. So.
And we have time for a few more questions. We have another question.
How similar is that pre-contemplative state to someone being in fight or flight?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, so fight or flight is like when your cortisol kind of is out of control and it sets off that smoke alarm in your body, right? So that's a thing too. If you are talking to someone in a pre-contemplative stage of change and you're like, you need to go to treatment, and they get defensive, they can get into that fight or flight mode that you're talking about. And denial can bring up flight or flight real fast because you are protecting yourself and you have walls all around you. So what happens is you might perceive the person as a threat even when they're not a threat. And that's when you can get like a volatile response or something like really angry and ugly, or the person flees. They just like leave and don't talk to you and don't answer their phone for weeks. And it's not like they're trying to give you a hard time, but their body can't sit with discomfort at all. It's like, right, like once you take the drug away from someone, their body completely panics and is like, wait, what? I was supposed to use this to survive, and now you took it away from me. An active addiction, if you're getting in the way of their drug of choice, then they see you as a threat, and they'll do anything possible to get you out of the way, right? Or tell you what you want to hear. So I think that flight or flight is seeing someone super defensive, dysregulated, shuts down, leaves. It's a difficulty managing your nervous system. And that's why I say for yourself as a family member is like, check your own triggers, because who knows if you end up going into that nervous response yourself, like how do you want to take care of yourself? And the brain definitely shuts down, right? Once we hit flight or flight, our prefrontal cortex does that thing, see you later, and then our body gets activated and ready for some kind of fight or danger. I don't know if I answered your question, but I went on a rant, so I forgot what the question was, but it was about flight or flight, right?
Yeah, and how similar the fight or flight stage resembles that pre-contemplation stage, and you did a really good job of walking us through that and what triggers that. We have time for, I would say, at least one more question. If there's one more out there in the crowd, we can definitely offer that space.
What would you say about for someone who likes to isolate a lot? Like, maybe is sober, not drinking or whatever the drug of choice is, but still is very, maybe separate from a substance abuse issue, but somebody who's just very, reclusive, I guess.
Yeah, I'd be curious, like, what efforts you took or, like, what things looked like when you try to talk to them, like, what responses were you getting? Were you just getting silence? If you know why they're isolating, is it because of, you said it's not related to substance use, it could be related to anything?
Yeah, I would say maybe a more complex substance abuse combined with some sort of
Mental health stuff. Yeah, I know, and isolation is tough to deal with. If someone, because even in active addiction, you get super depressed, right? And you don't even want to be using anymore. So that's depressing. It's like you actually are sick of it, but you can't stop. So that's enough for people to drink or do drugs on their own. So I think that that's a really normal thing to see. But it's a matter of like it's a matter of what communication would look like if you were able to talk to that person. Like, will they answer a text message? How much have you pushed? How much have you not pushed? It kind of depends. Is the person talking to you at all? How do they communicate? Do they respond like through a text or a call? Have you knocked on their door to see if they're okay, or does that push them away more? I know that's a tough situation because I think it depends on what the communication looked like before. When they're actively in the addiction, that is a hard thing because that is a matter of trying to get them help. But if they don't want to go get help, right, they isolate more. I think it's continuously reaching out, like, I'm here for you. Can we talk? Does the person answer you? I don't know if it's a specific situation. Do they answer you?
Sometimes, but they can be pretty isolated, I guess.
Yeah.
Sometimes just maybe that's the pre-contemplative. I just don't want to be messed with. Like this is my bubble, and
Yeah, it could be a lot of shame. That's also why people isolate, is they're really embarrassed. Or there's a lot of thought distortions that go on in people's heads we don't know about. Like, we would have no clue what that person's thinking about themselves. It's usually a lot of negative self-talk, which leads someone to isolate. But it's hard to know that if they're not talking to you. I know that is really tough, because even when I worked at rehab, people would shut down, and they would be there in person, and we wouldn't be able to reach them. Or they were like, nope, I don't want to change here. I'm just going to finish out the time I have here, leave early. I don't know if you have a common interest, if there is something unrelated to the addiction that you can bond on. If it's anything, like even just watching a sports game, or if they will let you in for something small. Do you have 2 minutes? Can I drop off a coffee? Do you want to meet me for food? I don't know how open they are, though, right? Because my advice could be terrible, depending on the situation. That is hard. I think you can keep planting seeds, keep reaching out. I don't know if you have shared interests, too, if they would be willing to come out for that. Help me understand what's going on. I don't understand what you're going through. I would love to just chat with you really quick one day. Let me know when you're ready to talk. You might have already tried that. It's tough, right? And I think if you're not getting a response, it's checking in with yourself and being like, what do you want to do with yourself and your own feelings? Because it is exhausting always trying to reach out to someone that isolates, right? It's a lot of effort and a lot of worrying. So I think there has to be a point where you set your own boundary as like, okay, I tried, I planted a seed. What am I going to do for myself? Which I know is easier said than done, but you got to preserve yourself too.
Mayan, if I can too,
Yeah.
I think it's also a challenge for us as communities too. You're bringing up something really great, like you're trying to connect with someone who feels isolated. You're trying to find common interests. You're trying to find a way of building a bridge. And it's oftentimes that one person that sees the other. This community here, this space, it's being built to try to connect with people, to try to create safety. What advice would you give to us as an organization, as a church, as a nonprofit, where we're trying to build communities? How can we connect to people who are isolated? What could we do differently to make sure that these spaces are welcoming?
Yeah, I think we have to be careful not to push our own agenda, even, and I just say that, like, that's why I'm saying we got to check what we're expecting out of the person. You only can recover with the community, right? And I always tell people that who didn't want to go to AA or some kind of support group, I'm like, you can't get sober on your own. You need people. You need people outside of your ego. Like, you have to step outside of it. I think we have to step outside of our egos. As a therapist, I had to step outside of my ego and be like, you're no expert. Every single person you talk to is going to be someone new, and you can't assume you know how to help them. So I had to stop assuming I knew how to help and figure out where the person was at first. So I think as a community, understanding where the person's coming from. Do they want our help? Because that's the main thing, right? And sometimes the social workers, like we might get excited and want to use our interventions and stuff, but it's like if the person doesn't want your help, that's when we pause, step back. Okay, what can we do for us? How can we take care of ourselves as a community, but still be there? We're still going to reach out. We're still going to offer. We're going to still invite you to things. But the more we push, the worse it can get for us. So we have to set some kind of boundary as a community too, which depends on the situation, but yeah.
This is a huge help. You've challenged us to also really explore inside of us what are our expectations. You've also given us a challenge that ahead of the holidays, what's our game plan? You know, how are we going to address if something comes up? But also importantly, how are we planning for our own needs? How are we going to react? Who do we talk to?
Yeah.
Having all of this has been really great in terms of also handling distress and planning for all those things, while also having some very real expectations about how people's brains operate when they feel threatened, when they feel cornered, when they feel singled out, as well as this great last question here as well about just isolation and how to connect with people that feel like they may be disconnected.
Yeah.
So I want to thank you. I want to say that we won't be out the door, although we may be wrapping up here. If you do have a question and you'd like to talk to Mayan, please stick around, ask us questions. As a quick reminder, we gather here in this space to build a community for individuals who are seeking to connect with others. So this is more than just a crisis space, more than just a typical group or a counseling. It's more than that. It's about having a community, a place where you can connect with others and say, I'm heard, I'm understood, that's my story, and I need someone else to talk to about that. And so, Mayan, thank you for being here in the space with us, for sharing your expertise and your wisdom with us. This is an amazing program. So if this is the first time you're hearing about the CARES program, just know that we are gathering here. We're going to have one more event in the month of December. Garrison Bravo, if you were here live, Garrison kicked off this series this season and is going to be closing with us. And you don't want to miss that because it's a continuation of what's happening here, which is how to handle the holidays. So come back with all your experiences and whatever happened during Turkey Day. Bring that here because we're going to get ready for Christmas and we're going to handle that too. So again, CARES programs, communities and relatives empowered for support. We'll be here next month. If it's your first time here, welcome. This is your space, and we'll be here. So thanks for joining us.